Hey, welcome back to PALS TV, everyone. We're going to be kicking off our lunchtime segment here, live from Columbus, Ohio, and joining our very own Professor Phil. He does it all on PALS TV. We have our cooking classes, we have our science classes, love our educational and health courses, and our weekly book club lessons. So we can continue where we left off with some Don Quixote. Phil, again, does it all. I watched him cut the grass earlier. So thank you, Phil, for everything you do. And enjoy reading the Don Quixote novel. So live from Columbus, we have Professor Phil.
Welcome back. Hope everybody had a nice weekend. Oh, I grab that. And oh, there isn't in the middle. Okay. Sorry, people. We're in the waiting room. Had to get to him. How you doing, Alex? So we're going to carry on with Don Quixote. As Aaron had just mentioned, we are now into chapter 5. If you'll recall, Don Quixote has now been made a knight by the innkeeper, and he rode out from the inn, ran into some merchants. They laughed at him. One of their servants beat him up, and he's lying there. Can't get up from the ground because his armor's too heavy, and he's a frail, middle-aged man like me, and is just not getting off the ground after he's been beat on carrying all this armor. So with that, let's get right into it. Finding then that in fact he could not move, he thought himself of having recourse to his usual remedy, which was to think of some passage in his books, and his craze brought to his mind about Baldwin and the Marquis of Mantua, when Carlotta left him wounded on the mountainside, a story known by heart by the children, not forgotten by the young men, and lauded and even believed by the old folk, and for all that not a whit truer than the miracles of Mahomet. Well, again, we're getting into the prejudices of Cervantes, the author here. Mahomet is a much older transliteration or respelling of Muhammad. Cervantes was a reasonably faithful Catholic, so anything of Islam he was against. That was very common at that time, although wrong then, just as it's wrong now. But Don Quixote says, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to think of a book. And what did they do in the books that I like? And that's generally what he does. So he thinks of this one story about Baldwin, a knight in literature. Nobody waved at me and told me that I didn't flip the share screen on. Fortunately, we've only got a sentence into this. There we go, that's much better. This seemed to him to fit exactly the case in which he found himself. So, making a show of severe suffering, he began to roll on the ground and with feeble breath repeat the very words which the wounded knight of the wood is said to have uttered. So he's got this story, and he says, well, I'm just going to do exactly what they did. So he says, oh, everything's horrible. And then he repeats the same thing that was written in the story that the knight said. Where art thou, lady mine, that thou my sorrow dost not rue? Thou canst not know it, lady mine, or else thou art untrue. So he said, again, he's probably speaking to Dulcinea, who's not there, but is the woman he's doing this all for. He says, where are you? You're not here helping me and being real upset that I'm hurt. You must not know that I'm hurt, or you would be a horrible person. And because I'm doing all this for you, you can't be a horrible person. And so he went on with the ballad as far as the lines, O noble Marquis of Mantua, my uncle and liege lord. So in the original story of Baldwin, that's what happens. At the end of this song where uh, Baldwin is complaining about things, he calls out to his uncle and asks for his help. As chance would have it, when he had got to this line, there happened to come by a peasant from his own village, a neighbor of his, who had been with a load of wheat to the mill. And he, seeing the man stretched there, came up to him and asked him who he was and what was the matter with him that he complained so dolefully. So there's a peasant, basically a farm worker at the time, though would do pretty much any work, who happens to be from the same place as Don Quixote, where Don Quixote is returning to pick up laundry and money. And he sees his neighbor there, Don Quixote, lying on the ground and yelling. So the peasant comes up and says, "Hey, what's wrong? You got to be okay." Don Quixote was firmly persuaded that this was the Marquis of Mantua, his uncle. So the only answer he made was to go on with his ballad, in which he told the tale of his misfortune and of the loves of the emperor's son and his wife, all exactly as the ballad sings it. Don Quixote thinks he's in the story that he's been remembering now, and is sure that this peasant is not his neighbor, but is the Marquis of Mantua, Baldwin's cousin, uncle, not Don Quixote's uncle, but right now he kind of thinks he's Baldwin. Again, a famous knight from stories. The peasant stood amazed at hearing such nonsense, and relieving him of the visor, already battered to pieces by blows, he wiped his face, which was covered with dust, and as soon as he had done so, he recognized him and said, "Señor Quixote," for so he appears to have been called when he was in his senses, and had not yet changed from a quiet country gentleman into a knight errant. "Who has brought your worship to this pass?" So the peasant has no idea what Don Quixote's on about, but he didn't want somebody just beat up. He's got to help him. So he comes by and he takes off Don Quixote's helmet, which we'll remember is just cardboard that's all tied to his head. And he wouldn't let people take it off before because they'd have to cut the straps. Now it's all beat up, so it's just falling apart. So he cleans up his face, and then the peasant recognizes Don Quixote and calls him by his original name, Quixote, and says, "What happened?" But to all questions, the other only went on with his ballad. And Don Quixote's really not responding to the peasant. He's just continuing to sing the song that is in the old story of Baldwin. Seeing this, the good man removed as well as he could his breastplate and backpiece to see if he had any wound, but he could perceive no blood nor any mark whatever. So the peasant figures, he must be really injured because he's not making any sense. So he starts taking off Don Quixote's armor to see if he's got some kind of injury, like blood loss is making him silly or something, but he doesn't see any problem. He then contrived to raise him from the ground, and with no little difficulty hoisted him upon his ass, which seemed to him to be the easiest mount for him, and collecting the arms, even to the splinters of the lance, he tied them on Rocinante, and leading him by the bridle and the ass by the halter, he took the road for the village, very sad to hear what absurd stuff Don Quixote was talking. So now that Don Quixote doesn't have all that armor on, it's not quite so heavy. The peasant picks him up. Well, I could throw him on his horse, but horses are really tall. I've got this ass, this donkey, that I've been leading around with all my wheat. They're much shorter. I'll put him on my ass. That'll be fine. So he throws him on the donkey and then gathers up all of Don Quixote's broken armor and weapons, ties all of those onto the horse, Rocinante, and then they take off. And they're going back to the village that Don Quixote is from, La Mancha. Nor was Don Quixote less so, for what with blows and bruises, he could not sit upright on the ass. And from time to time, he sent up sighs to heaven, so that once more he drove the peasant to ask what ailed him. So Don Quixote's all beat up. He can't really hold himself sitting. He's just kind of slumped down. He's, oh, it's awful. Oh, I hurt. And the peasant's kind of still worried about him. So he turns and says, hey, what's going on, not Don Quixote, Senor Quixote, because he does not know that he's called himself Don Quixote by now. And it could have been only the devil himself that put into his head tales to match his own adventures. For now, forgetting Baldwin, he bethought himself of the more Abindares, which when the alcalde of Antequera, Rodrigo de Narvaez, took him prisoner and carried him away to his castle, so that when the peasant again asked him how he was and what ailed him, he gave him for reply the same words and phrases that the captive Abindares gave to Rodrigo de Narvaez, just as he had read in the story in the Diana of Jorge de Montemayor, where it is written, applying it to his own case so aptly that the peasant went along, cursing his fate that he had to listen to such a lot of nonsense, from which, however, he came to the conclusion that his neighbor was mad, and so made all haste to reach the village to escape the wearisomeness of this harangue of Don Quixote's, who, at the end of it, said, Senor Don Rodrigo de Narvaez, your worship must know that this fair Zarifa I have mentioned is now the lovely Dulcinea del Toboso, for whom I have done, am doing, and will do the most famous deeds of chivalry that in this world have been seen, are to be seen, or ever shall be seen. Cervantes likes a long sentence. They were very popular at this time when he was writing. So Don Quixote thought he was in this story about Baldwin, but he'll just look around for anything, and nothing like what's going on in his life right now that he's on the ass and being taken into town, is like Baldwin's story. But there's another knight with a story like that, and now he thinks he's in that knight's story. But he hasn't really forgotten who he is, because he remembers, oh, I'm doing all this for Dulcinea. That's who I'm a knight for. Well, while I'm in this second story, the woman in that story, she's not important. It's really Dulcinea. And the peasant is starting to get some idea what's going on. This guy has lost his mind. He's not making any sense, and I'm really tired of listening to this. I'm going to get him to the village so I can give him to somebody else, and they can deal with these problems. To this, the peasant answered, Senor, sinner that I am, cannot your worship see that I am not Don Rodrigo de Narvaez, nor the Marquis of Mantua, but Pedro Alonso, your neighbor, and that your worship is neither Baldwin nor Abindares, but the worthy gentleman, Senor Quixote? All these stories you're talking about, none of that's true. Can't you tell that I'm your neighbor, Pedro, and you're Quixote? We know who each other are. I know who I am, replied Don Quixote, and I know that I may be not only those I have named, but all the 12 peers of France, and even all the 9 worthies, since my achievements surpass all that they have done altogether, and each of them on his own account. Don Quixote says, I know who I am. You don't need to be telling me who I am. I am those knights that you mentioned, and I'm all these other famous knights, because I'm better than they are, and I'm a better knight than all of them. So, and all of them put together aren't as good a knight as I am. So I can take all their names and be all of those people. Slide down there. With this talk and more of the same kind, they reached the village just as night was beginning to fall. But the peasant waited until it was a little later than the belabored gentleman, might not be seen riding in such a miserable trim. So as upset as the peasant is having to listen to all this nonsense of Don Quixote's, he still wants to make sure that that Don Quixote doesn't look ridiculous, nor the peasant. I'm sure he's concerned about himself. So Don Quixote keeps talking all this nonsense, and they get back to the village. It's just about dark, but the peasant slows down because he doesn't want all the neighbors to see Don Quixote talking all this nonsense. When it was what seemed to him the proper time, he entered the village and went to Don Quixote's house, which he found all in confusion. And there were the curate and the village barber, who were great friends of Don Quixote. And his housekeeper was saying to them in a loud voice, "What does your worship think can have befallen my master, Senor Leciante Pero Perez?" For so the curate was called. "It is 3 days now since anything has been seen of him, or the hack, or the buckler, lance, or armor." So they get to Don Quixote's house, and as they walk in, the peasant sees the curate, which is a type of priest, a local one, as well as the barber, who does some medical work, as well as cutting your hair back then. And the housekeeper said, "Where's Don Quixote gone? What are we going to do? He just disappeared and all this stuff is gone. I don't know what's going on." And she keeps asking the curate, the priest, "What are we going to do?" And she goes on, "Miserable me, I am certain of it. And it is true as that I was born to die, that these accursed books of chivalry he has, and has got into the way of reading so constantly, have upset his reason. For now I remember having often heard him saying to himself that he would turn knight errant and go all over the world in quest of adventures." So the housekeeper, not knowing but guessing, has figured out what Don Quixote's doing. She says, "Oh, he's been reading these books about knights. I bet that's what he's doing. Because he used to talk about it. He was just going to go be a knight and take off. I'll bet that's what happened." And although she doesn't know it, she is right. To the devil and Barabbas with such books that have brought to ruin in this way the finest understanding there was in all La Mancha. "Oh, these books are horrible. They should be thrown out. Don Quixote was such a smart guy, and they have destroyed him." The niece, and you'll remember he also has a niece, Don Quixote has a niece. The niece said the same and more. "You must know, Master Nicholas," for that was the name of the barber, "it was often my uncle's way to stay 2 days and nights together, poring over these unholy books of misadventures, after which he would fling the book away and snatch up a sword and fall to slashing the walls. And when he was tired out, he would say he had killed 4 giants like 4 towers, and the sweat that flowed from him when he was very weary, he said was the blood of the wounds he had received in battle. And then he would drink a great jug of cold water and become calm and quiet, saying that this water was a most precious potion, which the sage Esquife, a great magician and friend of his, had brought him." So apparently this is not the first time, according to Don Quixote's niece, that he's done this kind of thing. He would sit and read these books for days on end, never stopping or sleeping. He would get up and grab that sword and beat up the house for a long time until he's sweaty and beat up. And then he'd say, "I just killed a bunch of giants," pointing at the walls. So whether this is true or not, the niece is certainly saying that this is what's going on and what has been going on. "But I take all the blame upon myself for never having told your worships of my uncle's vagaries, that you might put a stop to them before things had come to this pass, and burn all these accursed books, for he has a great number that richly deserve to be burned like heretics." So he says, "I should have told you this before, back when Don Quixote was still here, and now he's gone. But if I would have told you before, you could have gotten rid of the books. You guys are important people in our village, and you would have the authority to do that. You'd be allowed." "So say I too," said the curate. "And by my faith tomorrow shall not pass without public judgment upon them. May they be condemned to the flames, lest they lead those that read them to behave as my good friend seems to have behaved." Now the priest says, "Oh, these books, we can't be having that. I'm going to test them tomorrow and check them out. And if that's what's happening, these books are making people go off and not attend to their own business, then we're going to burn them all, everyone in the village." All this the peasant heard, and from it he understood at last what was the matter with his neighbor. So he began calling aloud, "Open, your worships, to Senor Baldwin, and to Senor the Marquis of Mantua, who comes badly wounded, and the Senor Abendares, the Moor, whom the valiant Rodrigo de Narvaez, the alcalde of Antequera, brings captive. So now the peasant is mostly making a joke and says, oh, I know what's going on. Senor Quixote, Don Quixote, thinks he's a knight. So I'm going to go ahead and play along with it. And he shouts out to the people in the house that he is the people from those stories. And Don Quixote is the people from those stories. And they should let him in. Oh, pardon me, need a drink. At these words, they all hurried out. And then when they recognized their friend, master, and uncle, who had not yet dismounted from the ass because he could not, they ran to embrace him. So everybody inside hears all this noise that the peasant is making. And they run out and say, oh, look, it's my uncle or my friend, the guy that works here, Senor Quixote, who we know as Don Quixote. I run out and like, oh, how are you doing? Hold, said he, for I am badly wounded through my horse's fault. Carry me to bed, and if possible, send for the wise Urganda to cure and see to my wounds. I said, hey, nobody touch me. I'm all beat up and I'm hurt, but I'm not hurt because I'm a bad knight. I'm hurt because the horse screwed up. But nobody do anything special. Just get me to bed and get me this magician from a story, and that person will cure me. See there, plague on it, cried the housekeeper at this. Did not my heart tell the truth as to which foot my master went lame of? So now the housekeeper says, I was right. He was thinking he's a part of these stories. It's exactly what I was just saying. To bed with your worship at once. We will contrive to cure you here without fetching that Hurgada. She gets the name wrong because she does not care about these stories. But she says, look, Don Quixote, Senor Quixote, you need to get to bed, just like you said, but then we're going to get you well. And you're not going to think you're a knight. And we're not going to get this weird wizard you're talking about. That's not going to happen. A curse, I say once more, and 100 times more, on those books of chivalry that have brought your worship to such a pass. Again, she's blaming these books. But they should be cursed, because they're the ones that have caused you to act like this. They carried him to bed at once, and after searching for his wounds, could find none. But he said they were all bruises from having had a severe fall with his horse Rocinante when in combat with 10 giants, the biggest and the boldest to be found on earth. So they get him into bed. And they're like, oh, is he hurt? And he says, no, I'm just bruised. And it wasn't the servant and a bunch of merchants that beat me up. It was 10 giants. They were great, huge giants. Nobody's seen giants this big, and they beat me up pretty bad. So, said the curate, are there giants in the dance? By the sign of the cross, I will burn them tomorrow before the day over. So the priest says, oh, now he's thinking there's giants. If there's giants in all this nonsense, I'm going to burn them right out of these books that I'm burning. They put a host of questions to Don Quixote, but his only answer to all was, give him something to eat and leave him to sleep, for that was what he needed most. So they're all trying to figure out where he's been and what he's been doing. But he said, no, just let me rest. Get me some food. I'm hungry and I'm tired. You do that and I'll be fine. They did so, and the curate questioned the peasant at great length as to how he had found Don Quixote. The priest says, okay, we'll get him food, we'll get him rest, but we need to find out what's going on. So I'm going to ask the peasant that brought him in, who, as you know, doesn't know a whole lot of what's going on. He told him, and the nonsense he had talked when found, and on the way home, all of which made the licensate the more eager to do what he did the next day, which was to summon his friend the barber, Master Nicholas, and go with him to Don Quixote's house. So the priest gets all this information. Says, oh, yeah, Don Quixote is out there. We've got to fix this. We've got to get rid of these books, and we've got to make him know that he's not really a knight, and his real name is Senor Quixote. So we'll wait until the next day, because remember, it's late at night. And he says, I'm going to go grab the barber who we'd met earlier, and we're going to bring him into Don Quixote's house and try and solve this problem between the two of us. All right, we've got quite some time, and we're already done with chapter 5. It's a fairly short chapter. So we're going to go right in to chapter 6 and get part of that knocked out. See what happens next in the story. He was still sleeping, so the curate asked the niece for the keys of the room where the books, the authors of all the mischief were, and right willingly she gave them. So Don Quixote's still in bed when the priest comes by. So he goes to the niece and says, give me the library key. I'm going to go deal with these books. They are the problem here. They all went in, the housekeeper with them, and found more than 100 volumes of big books, very well bound, and some other small ones. So they find a lot of books. 100 books is quite a lot for anybody to have now. Back then, that was an immense amount of books. Almost nobody would have that many books in a private collection. A major church with a whole bunch of books, they might have it. Some schools, but that's about it. So Don Quixote has more books than these people have ever seen. The moment the housekeeper saw them, she turned about and ran out of the room and came back immediately with a saucer of holy water and a sprinkler, saying, "Here, your worship, Senor Licensate. Sprinkle this room. Don't leave any magician of the many there are in these books to bewitch us in revenge for our design of banishing them from the world." So the housekeeper thinks not only are these books bad, they are evil, religiously evil. They are of the devil. So the priest needs to shake holy water all over these things. So she brings some holy water so he can do it. Because there are magicians in the books. They consort with the devil. So you need to take care of those before we actually deal with the books. The simplicity of the housekeeper made the licensate laugh. And he directed the barber to give him the books one by one to see what they were about, as there might be some found among them that did not deserve the penalty of fire. And the priest thinks, oh, that's ridiculous. You don't need to throw holy water on books. They're not cursed. They're just bad books, and we need to burn them because they're clearly making people sick. But we need to go through them, because if they're fine books, then we're going to keep those. It's only the ones that have made Don Quixote think he's a knight we got to get rid of. No, said the niece, there's no reason for showing mercy to any of them. They have every one of them done mischief. Better fling them out the window into the court and make a pile of them and set fire to them, or else carry them into the yard, and there a bonfire can be made without the smoke giving any annoyance. And he says, you'll need to go through all these books one by one. Every one of them is about knights, and every single one of them is to blame for Don Quixote thinking he's a knight. Let's just chuck them all out and burn them right now. The housekeeper said the same. So eager were they both for the slaughter of those innocents. But the curate would not agree without first reading, at any rate, the titles. So the housekeeper says, yeah, burn them all right now. That's what we need to do. The priest says, whoa, I am not burning books unless I know they're causing a problem. I'm at least going to look at the titles. And, maybe some of them are good. And I will know these titles. And those we are not burning. The first that Master Nicholas put into his hand was the 4 books of Amadis of Gaul. Amadis of Gaul is a volume, 4-book volume of knights. So clearly the first one the barber grabs is exactly the thing they're looking for to burn. This seems a mysterious thing, said the curate. For, as I have heard say, this was the first book of chivalry printed in Spain, and from this all the others derive their birth and origin. So it seems to me that we ought inexorably to condemn it to the flames as the founder of so vile a sect. So a priest says, oh, this is the very first book of knights that we got in this country. And all of the rest of them clearly depend on this one having been popular. So we're definitely burning this one. Nay, sir, said the barber. I too have heard that this is the best of all the books of this kind that have been written. And so, as something singular in its line, it ought to be pardoned. The barber says, well, what I've heard is that this is a really good book. It's a wonderful piece of literature. So, because it's special, we should keep it and not destroy this one. True, said the curate, and for that reason, let its life be spared for the present. Let us see that other, which is next to it. And the priest says, that's a good point, barber. We're going to leave this one alone, at least for right now. Let's check out the next one. It is, said the barber, the Sergas de Esplandian, the lawful son of Amadis of Gaul. Oh, this one's about the son of the person that the first one was about. That's what it is. Then verily, said the curate, the merit of the father must not be put down to the account of the son. Look, just because the first book was good, and this is a book about that guy's son, doesn't mean that this one is also good. Take it, mistress housekeeper. Open the window and fling it into the yard, and lay the foundation of the pile for the bonfire we are to make. Just take this one, take it outside, and let's get ready to burn some books. The housekeeper obeyed with great satisfaction, and the worthy Esplandian went flying into the yard to await with all patience the fire that was in store for him. Proceed, said the curate. The housekeeper throws it out, and the priest says, all right, let's look at the next book. This that comes next, said the barber, is Amadis of Greece. And indeed, I believe all those on this side are of the same Amadis lineage. So there are many books that are based on this first book that they decide to keep. And Don Quixote seems to have them all, and everyone in this section is part of that. But to the yard with the whole of them, said the curate, or to have the burning of, oh, that's going to be tough, of Queen Pentikientra. I'm going to get this. Of Queen Pentikinestra, and the shepherd Daniel and his eclogues, and the bedeviled and involved discourses of his author. I would burn with them the father who begot me if he were going about in the guise of a knight errant. I said, you know what? I'm not having any of these books. Let's throw them all. You know, and if we're doing all this, we might as well get the first one too. I am of the same mind, said the barber. And so am I, added the niece. In that case, said the housekeeper, here, into the yard with them. So they all agree. And the housekeeper says, oh, well, I'm chucking them out if we're all for that. They were handed to her, and as there were many of them, she spared herself the staircase and flung them out the window. So the housekeeper has been taking one book at a time, because we're only through one before we got to all this. And she's walking down the stairs and outside. Oh, there's a lot of books now. No, I'm not walking all those stairs. I'm just chucking them out the window into the yard. We'll burn them there. Who is that tub there? Said the curate. This, said the barber, is Don Alabante de Lora. What's that book? That's the book about Don Alabante. The author of that book, said the curate, was the same that wrote The Garden of Flowers, and truly there is no deciding which of the two books is the more truthful, or, to put it better, the less lying. All I can say is, send this one into the yard for a swaggering fool. Here it says, what, that book there about Don Olivante, the author of that wrote something I don't like. So we're definitely burning that one. This that follows is Flores Marte of Hircania, said the barber. Senor Flores Marte here, said the curate. Then by my faith, he must take up his quarters in the yard, in spite of his marvelous birth and visionary adventures. For the stiffness and dryness of his style deserve nothing less. Into the yard with him, and the other, mistress housekeeper. So he says, the curate, the priest, now says, you know what? I don't even care about this book, whether it's hurting anybody or not. It's not very well written. I don't like it. So we're throwing it in the fire. With all my heart, senor, said she, and executed the order with great delight. This, said the barber, is the Night Plateer. So the housekeeper chucks that book out the window, and the barber pulls out the next one and tells everybody what it is. An old book, that, said the curate, but I found no reason for clemency in it. Send it after the others without appeal, which was done. The curate says, well, that's an old book. It's been around for a while, but doesn't matter to me. We are burning that book too. Throw it on the fire. Another book was opened, and they saw it was entitled The Knight of the Cross. For the sake of the holy name this book has, says the curate, its ignorance might be excused. But then, they say, behind the cross there's the devil. To the fire with it. The priest says, well, this one sounds like a good religious book, but I bet it's sneaky, and it's really all about the devil, so we're burning this one too. All right, yeah, we can get through this. Taking down another book, the barber said, this is the Mirror of Chivalry. Well, this is the next title. I know his worship, said the curate. That is where Senor Reynaldos of Montalban figures with his friends and comrades, greater thieves than Caucus, and the 12 peers of France with the voracious historian Turpin. However, I am not for condemning them to more than perpetual banishment, because, at any rate, they have some share in the invention of the famous Matteo Boiardo, whence too the Christian poet Ludovico Ariosto wove his web, to whom, if I find him here, and speaking any language but his own, I shall show no respect whatever, but if he speaks his own tongue, I will put him upon my head. So, Bree says, well, that looks like a good book. Talks about these others and inspired this really good writer that I like, this great poet. And if we find this poet's book, and it is not in the original language that the poet used, we are burning it. But if it's in the original, then we can keep it. All right. That is quite a bit, so let's stop it there. One more sentence. Well, I have him in Italian, said the barber, but I do not understand him. The poet says, well, I've got him in the original, but I don't get it in that original. And the barber is fairly educated, but probably not as much as the priest then, so this is not terribly surprising. All right, so we're going to stop there for today. We're about halfway through chapter 6, and we'll pick up next Tuesday. Let me knock this over. Anybody have any questions on what we read today, or just want to talk about anything for a couple minutes? Click.
I really like that
Alex.
story. I really like that story.
I'm glad you enjoy it. I also recommend the movie.
Yep.
Anybody else? Lauren, were you waving or did you just have your hand up?
I was saying hi, Phil.
Oh, well, howdy. I've got to get a call. How's Crystal? This is Phil. How may I help you? Nope. Oh, well, that didn't work anyway. Okay, so since they didn't answer. Anybody else have anything? All right. Everybody doing good today? Everybody have an excellent weekend. Who did something exciting they want to talk about? Well, of course, it's Caitlin.
I went with my friend Bobby and had lunch with him.
Lunch over the weekend with your friend. Did you wear a mask and appropriately social distance?
Yes.
Good job, Caitlin. Good job. Anybody else have anything?
Thank you, Phil. That was wonderful, as always. Lauren, have another question? I saw your hand go up real quick, Lauren.
Okay, you gotta have to say it again.
I had friends over and we played cornhole.
Feels good.
That's a fun game.
It's a good way to spend the holiday weekend playing cornhole. I like it. All right, everyone. Well, thanks again, Phil. We appreciate chapter we get through 5 and some of 6.
Yes, indeed.
Quixote. Looking forward to next week. So come back and join us again, Phil's Book Club, next Tuesday. Take another little short break and then be heading over to Art Outside the Lines. Join our friends there. So come back here soon to PALS TV. Thanks again, Phil.
Take care, everybody.